Earlier tonight, I spoke about the Steinle verdict and what the president's been saying on Twitter with California Congressman Darrell Issa. Take a look. Congressman Issa, first time on the show. We appreciate you joining us on a Sunday. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and thanks for having me on.
So this Steinle verdict, everyone is outraged about it. I'd love to get your reaction on that specifically, but more generally, this insane sanctuary cities policy that everyone is so fired up about. What can we do about that in the future?
Well, it's in the courts right now, and with the president's leadership, he is trying to at least make it financially disadvantageous, if you will, for cities to decide that they want to take federal money to help fight crime and then not do their part, at least as to criminal aliens. It's one of those tough situations. Obviously, the perpetrator was clearly in the country because Sanctuary City and a failure to contact ICE in this particular case occurred. And obviously that isn't the reason for the jury verdict, but it certainly is the reason he was there to commit the crime.
But this policy was, if you like, born and raised right here in California. It was San Francisco that initiated it, and it's spread nationwide. I understand the argument that the administration is making about financial incentives and so on, but isn't the policy itself of non-cooperation actually illegal?
Well, what's amazing is that the initial sanctuary city concept was one that law enforcement said, if we're trying to get witnesses of a crime, we want people to report, we're not going to ask what their status was. To that extent, it was good. But when you have a known criminal and you let them go free rather than letting the federal law enforcement, take them away for their status, then you've crossed the line. I do believe that it's an example of something that may not be criminal technically, but it certainly is criminal if you're the family of some loved one lost because basically a crime was committed because he or she was back on the street.
But when it comes to immigration, it seems to me that, someone like I really believe in localism, in the idea that local communities should determine what happens in their areas. I think that's a key part of the kind of positive populist agenda that we promote on this show. But on immigration, surely you've got to have one immigration policy for one country. You've got to have one border that's controlled and one immigration policy. This kind of patchwork where cities decide how they want to implement it, surely that just doesn't make any sense.
You're exactly right that immigration is one of those things in which a failure to participate in keeping criminals off the street and people who shouldn't be here from being here affects every other city. San Francisco's policy causes Sacramento to be less safe. It causes Reno to be less safe because, MS-13 and other groups do not limit themselves to just the sanctuary city.
I just want to turn briefly to some of the other news that's going on right now. It's an incredibly busy news weekend. You've seen the president out there tweeting today on a range of matters, including the Michael Flynn news from earlier in the weekend and so on. Where do we stand right now with all this going on? The Flynn thing, the tax bill that was successfully moved forward at the end of last week. How do you see things right now?
Well, I think legislatively, Congress is getting their feet under them. But in the case of Flynn, it's a good reminder that at least sometimes when you lie to law enforcement, you're held accountable. Obviously, Hillary Clinton was not held accountable for lying. Lois Lerner was not held accountable for lying. It's that double standard that I think the president was tweeting about when he noted that you've got an FBI agent dismissed who very clearly had a bias when he was investigating Hillary Clinton, has a bias when he's involved with the president, and now that bias is known by everybody.
And do you think that there's any consequence that should follow from that? Do you think the action that needs to be taken has already happened in the sense that he was taken off?
Well, I think it calls into question the investigation and the decisions by former Director Comey as to whether Hillary Clinton committed crimes, which I believe she did, and should be prosecuted for them. So I think in this case, reopening that investigation, having the materials reviewed honestly and independently, since obviously Director Comey was not independent, the deputy was not independent because he took about $500,000 to the benefit of his wife, and this agent certainly had a bias. So these kinds of things would cause anyone one to say, for public confidence alone, that investigation should be reopened and properly analyzed for whether or not she should have been charged with the crime, at least as to those classified documents that she knowingly left federal service with in her possession.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.